Let's just start streaming, shall we? And we'll get going and figure out what's going on with all of this. Hello, anybody who might be here. Welcome to Airwindows live streaming. And I have very little idea what we're going to do other than pretend we're in a deep, dark cave. That's right. This being, of course, galactic. And yeah. So, hi. Actually, that's kind of loud. Maybe I should turn it down. Hang on. So, yeah, what we're doing today is sort of an overview, because where I'm at is my regular daily life things have been going kind of off the hook lately, and I am not mentally together enough to wire stuff together, but I am mentally together enough to go over my copious notes on all the various things DIY could be. And as you can see, I also have the blinking lights going on, so if people would be interested, I can also talk over the stuff that I do musically, and maybe we can have a conversation about that. We'll see. And I can do about 2 hours of that, and then with a bit of luck, once I am hang on. Oh, hey. It's a chat window. It can be a very small chat window because there's never many people there. But yeah, that's what I'll be able to see. So yeah. Where I've been at, I am beginning Man, that reverb is so distracting. I think I'm going to make the reverb go away. Excuse me for a moment. There we go. So where I've been at is I have put out the first of a series of really bizarre filter plugins, and these are with an eye to eventually becoming the Z series. And what the Z series is about is making sampler style filters. Excuse me while I try to have some chai tea. I can't load myself up on too much coffee all the time or I'll just break, and that's off the table. We can't be having that. Hey, Jess. So, what we will do is not so much break as fall back in some of the stuff that I do kind of on the self-care side of things. And that can be stuff like working out how my creativity works with the modular system, and that'll probably contribute to questions of what could be made in DIY systems. I also have a entire, there are many questions that I can answer as to how I'm doing these jams and things. And I can also talk about, well, I can when I, hang on. We've got quite a little experience here. Don't mind me. This is just my usual bizarre special effects going on. And we can do our best with them. This is not really a sensible thing to be doing, so let's shut that off. Oh, hey. That's an unusual visual effect. And that's because it's looking at a window. So there's this solarizing effect, which if I face it away from the window, it's acting much more normally. See, this is the camera that I would be using to point at the system and point out various things to talk about. Otherwise, you have a much more long-range visual. And I would be delighted to talk about the modular sequences, because there is indeed development, and I work pretty hard on that, so sometimes that's where my attention is going. Now, let me sort of catch up. Here's another thing that I was working on. I'm interested in trying to set up a control surface that I can put into my little Eurorack bay. When I say Eurorack bay, what I mean is this. Oh, and I can see what's going on here is I have video feedback happening, so don't let that bother you. I'm going to just have to deal with it. It's that or change it back. But below the sampler is this little Eurorack bay that I've got. And the video thing that this camera is going into is in it, and then there is some space for other stuff. And honestly, I think that the video feedback is becoming unduly distracting. So forgive me while I go and fix that. All I got to do is go to the keying and shut that off. That should have done it. Let's find out. And nope, apparently not. Okay, so I think I'm just going to have to live with this. And yeah, this is the case it lived in. And what I've been thinking about is how I'm going to get a MIDI cable plugged from something with faders on it into probably the side of my keyboard. And from that into the computer, which is running Logic. And this is the software side of what I'm doing musically now, which is of more interest to Airwindows fans, honestly, because this is the plugin oriented side. As you can see, I'm not really running any plugins, but the thing with it is, like, as you can see, this is also where I can be going into reverb. This is the reverb that I'm using now. I used to use hardware, and now instead this is the live system, and everything is going into Logic. And as you can see, 13 here is my microphone. It's coming in on input 13. All this other stuff is also making noises. I just can't hear them very well because I have the speakers turned way down so my mic doesn't feed back. And I can turn that back off again. So this is kind of what I'm doing these days as far as making music. And as I was beginning to tell folks, that's a little dark, I apologize. This is not a good week for me. And I'll say that that is because I thought I was done with doing my whole taxes and everything. And then I got a random bill from the tax people saying we'd require more information, and I had to talk to my accountant about that, and he wasn't available immediately because he was busy the last weeks of his workflow, and my water heater started to fail, so I've been proceeding to do that, as in talk to Green Mountain Power and also this plumbing company that Green Mountain Power works through, as far as getting it removed / replaced and figuring out what to do around that. And that involves me talking to lots of strangers that I've never spoken to before, which is difficult for me. And also my car needs a steering rack replacement because the power steering fails periodically. And I've got the steering rack, but then the mechanic that I've been using seems to be going through one of those political meltdown phases where he doesn't really want to deal with somebody with a mask coming into his place. And his friends definitely aren't happy with it. And I've had to find a different mechanic, which hopefully is an acceptable mechanic. I'll find out because I've made an appointment for him to do the steering rack. And if that goes well, that'll be really cool, because I was able to find a replacement Subaru steering rack that's 13:1 instead of 18:1 ratio. So the regular old Subaru will start driving like an SDI, and that'll be great fun. But that's yet another person, a stranger to talk to, and kind of quietly walking away from another situation that's not gone well. So you can say that. I am pointedly avoiding saying that, but in fact, I would ask you to talk more gently about folks that we don't agree with in my chat, because I just run it in a more chill way. I don't feel like you're really far off, though. So in the middle of this, I need to also do hundreds of ports to Mac VST for the M1 processor. I have done A. I've done all the plugins beginning with A. I'm beginning to have new tech support demands from people who are like having problems with my software, but for unusual reasons. In that I'm seeing people who are not able to see the zip files on my web pages because they're running some kind of new version of Chrome that is rolling out a thing where it blocks links to zips. So apparently on the internet you can't link to zips anymore. And that's really helpful for somebody like me. So I'm answering tech problem calls with that. And I'm also coping with the pleasing but also stressful situation, having asked my community what you wanted me to be doing. Do you want me to do this DIY coding thing where, here, back over to this, where we're building stuff like this, and I'm teaching people how to do that kind of thing. Also note up here, we've got a Bastel Castle all set up. And the response I got back was, stop building these things out of circuits. We don't care, make more plugins. And this is fair. I feel like that is a sensible response. Although I would point out that the people who I'm asking are uniformly, since I'm asking them on the internet, they are people who are on the internet, meaning that they have computers and can use free plugins. So that's maybe a little biased, but then there's no way anybody who is interested in building circuitry and wasn't on the internet would even be able to see what I'm doing at all. So it's kind of a moot point. In any regard, we're talking about diving more deeply into the getting nifty gear and making plugins out of it. And that's fun. I mean, it's a little stressful being like, now I have to model an EMU E6400. I've got some advice as to how to do that, which ought to be somewhat helpful. I've had some... The trick with that is that I basically need to be using the device in order to get a real sense of what's going on with it. I can do things like when I was working on X high pass, I asked people, show me examples of the EMU sampler doing its high pass thing in such a way that it's cool and interesting and the way that you want it. And I didn't get very many responses. I got one example, which I think was a useful example in its way. It doesn't correspond to X high pass very well. X high pass is a little extreme. It's a much more demanding and much more radical sounding thing. So yeah, it's exciting enough, the prospect of being able to get fancy plugins and fancy gear and making plugins out of that it's only going to go so fast. This all in the middle of the time when I'm getting my vaccinations. It's the Moderna, and I'm about halfway between doses. The first one was a couple of weeks, and I'm pretty sure I've recovered from whatever that was as far as shaking it off. And the second dose is supposed to be even more intense, and that's going to be early June. And I've also had to talk down people who emailed me in a panic or things like that, going, "Oh dear, don't you understand that you have inflicted chips upon yourself and you're going to be taken over by Bill Gates or poisoned or something like that?" And I disagree with that point of view. I think that it's a sensible thing to be doing, but that's kind of, yeah, I don't need to say much more about that other than coping with stuff like that is also stressful to me. So there might be some weeks where I fall back on just patiently stepping through all of the new VST plugins for the M1 platform. And when people say, "Oh, I tried all of the A series plugins for the M1 VSTs and your website doesn't work," I can't tell whether the plugin isn't working for them. One fellow was like, "Nothing's showing up in Logic when it is for other people." And that might be because they tried to install the retro plugins first and Logic is caching them in some way. So we got to walk through that kind of stuff. And then also the people who are saying things like, "When I click on your samples, nothing happens and it's just a blank page." Those samples are in zip files. if the thing with versions of Chrome refusing to see zip files continues to be a thing, I'm going to see more of that, and I don't know what I'm going to do about it other than have to tell people, oh yeah, Google Chrome is not letting you download files anymore. And I don't know, use Firefox or something. So life's very interesting. And my hope is that for today we can just hang out. I'll bring you up to speed on how some of this stuff works, and maybe talk you through like questions about how the modular sequences are set up. Sound great to me. Like, that is my happy place. So by all means, let's ask questions about those. And I can probably have see, now I got distracted by talk of Chrome and Firefox. I can probably have X high pass for this coming Sunday, because that's going along reasonably well, which does not mean that it behaves well, because it's a really nasty, gnarly thing. But for what it is, and for some of the things that you could do with it, which is completely unlike anything that you're going to get anywhere else, it is functioning. So I think I'm ready to go ahead with that. So, maybe this would be a good moment to jump over to this system and start talking about some of these things. And I believe I can hear what this system does, and I believe I can switch the that's handling noise. Sit over here and figure out what I'm doing, and use this little thing, the camera on a little tripod stand thing, to point out anything I'm talking about that you can't see in long distance vision there. So that might be a thing. The last jam that I did was called Airwindows Embers Breaks. That's a bit of an inside joke. It's like a running gag in drum and bass forums. For denormalization, is 1E-8 sufficient? Probably not, but there's a specific number, and I don't guarantee that I've got it right. You know, I can hope that I've got it right. Whether I do have it right is a whole other question. Oh, it's 1:30 in the morning in Sydney. Cool, you're in Australia. Yeah, I'll spend a bit of time. I've got another hour and a half or so. Again, I don't guarantee that I'm making much sense today, but and that's because, like, what with my autism and such, when I have to do a whole bunch of dealing with strangers and everything being different, it can wind up with me being almost non-functional. And I'll do what I can with that. But yeah, as far as the sequencing process and modulating and such, I can talk about different instruments, because the whole modular synthesizer is kind of based on different instruments. And the way I've got them set up, you can kind of hear what they're doing. I can make a noise start to happen. It's very quiet, but you can hear it. So let's see now. I've got a variety of things going through here, and probably what I need to do is, oh, that's not going to be helpful at all. That was just blackness. What you're hearing here, actually now I'm baffled because I don't get some of this. Oh wait, there we go. So I got a variety of different instruments. This one's the kick. It's being sequenced by timing coming from here. Timing goes up to a variety of other things. For instance, all of these separate things, it's coming into this place here. This thing called mutes is able to switch all of these things individually. And they are going to these Music Thing modular Turing machines. I'm craning my neck around trying to make sure that I'm pointing in the right direction. See, there we go. Good enough. For instance, this one, which the outputs are over here, is coming out of this, going up to this, which is called a trigger delay. The delay is a fairly long delay, and the length is being made to be a relatively long length. If it's still triggering, if it's still making an envelope, when another trigger comes in, it'll ignore the other one. So what I can do is shorten the length, and it starts responding to every little trigger. But if I increase the length, it's only going to fire on the first triggers. In fact, I think maybe this camera is annoying even if it is more of a close-up. So how about let's lose it. How about I just talk through what's going on here. So I know the video effect, this is the only way that I have access to this webcam, is through the Sleepy Circuits Hypno, so that's kind of freaky. Instead, let's pretend that it is just a podcast, and I will not attempt to make sense of all this while also juggling a camera in my hands. The blinking light here is going to this set of switches. That fires this Turing machine. Turing machine is a shift register that has randomness to it. You can tell it to be different lengths. For instance, let's do a 4-beat. And then it can also do a 5. Eight, 16, and so on. And that is firing this kick drum. This is a Blue Lantern Asteroid BD. It's got a tune control. Envelope gives it a bit of a ripple on the attack. Decay makes it go for longer. Tone makes it go from dark to this bright control. And there's this thing called buzz, which is a soft clip. Now you could use a soft clip to take a triangle waveform and make it into a sine waveform. And you do that kind of like this. Say if I leave it at the sustained note like that, and then we turn buzz up, that's increasing the gain. That's basically the virtues of just adding a distortion to your low frequency kick. And it's also going to clip whatever the attack is, I believe, unless the attack is happening after this. But one of the things that can happen, if this is a twin T circuit, and when I say twin T circuit, what I mean is it is like a resonant bandpass. That can go between these frequencies. And then I'm not sure exactly what this envelope control does, but you can hear that it modifies things. In fact, I think some of the irregularities in this are because we've got a twin T filter going on, and so that is basically firing a oscillating filter. So it's just ringing like a sine wave, it's ringing like a bell. You could have it be a much higher frequency. I'm probably going to want to figure out what env does at some point, especially if I want to make my own circuits like this. This is also the same circuit that's used for cowbell sounds in old Rolands, just at a much, much higher frequency. That is the current kick drum sound that I've got. It's going into channel 5 on the, yeah, I dare say it is. I can try to lower my voice. I know that the stream is going to be a bit loud. Let's turn that mic down, because I'm going to be raising my voice, and turn the gain up. I'm going to try to avoid stepping on the cables. I'm definitely going to be hearing myself through the speaker, but if I turned the gain down a little bit, it's probably not going to feed back on me. This is actually the same principle that the twin T filter uses. Like making this happen is the same thing as holding the microphone up to the speaker. It's essentially just doing a feedback. And then buzz is clipping the output of that feedback. Now the types of things that I'm making mix out of when I do this modular stuff, and one of the things I've been trying to, I realized not so long ago that one of the things I was trying to do was do electronic music that was coming entirely off of the right side of the brain. I was very not interested in arranging and songwriting and stuff. I wanted it to be a continuous improvisation where I would just go and do stuff. A recent Adam Neely video had a quote from somebody where he was talking about songs, and I think it's a composer of some kind. And he said, words make you think thoughts, music makes you feel feelings, but songs make you feel thoughts. And I thought that was so cool that I wrote it down, because it's like, that's probably why I have problems with writing songs, is because I don't generally combine those things easily. I want to go off into right brainland and stay there. So I added another insight, which is arranging makes you think feelings. And the reason I struggle with it is because it's very hard for me to do. That said, it's worth doing in its own right. Let's see. Get a little light over here. There we go. Do I have Buchla modules? Not so much. I can barely see the chat. Let me move the chat over to where I can see it a little better, because I would like to be answering people's questions rather than just monologuing. Although I did warn you folks, I'm particularly burnt out today, so there's only so much you can get from me. I ought to have at least some cool plug-in oriented thing by Sunday, but the Wednesday streams are really catch as catch can for the time being. Anyway, no Buchla modules at this time, but can you delay distortion so that the transient stays intact? In software I could. Somebody was asking me for a link to Compressor just in email just recently. It's another tech support thing. As stuff expands, you wind up with more tech support stuff, and it's all been very positive and nice, so I do enjoy it. It's not nearly as hard as like figuring out what the tax people want as far as feedback from whatever it is they're asking about. That's the kind of stuff that I just go to my accountant and go, tell me what to do. I don't understand. Anyways, the stuff that I'm doing is not so much Buchla, although I have some stuff that is not dissimilar. Up here I have 3 Doepfer modules, and these are A110-4 through 0 VCOs, but really what they are is they're sine wave oscillators. But being Doepfer, they have a bunch of inputs and outputs and things, and so this is set up like a Buchla might be with heavy cross-modulation, because the thing about Buchla stuff is it is very much based on complex oscillators. And come to think of it, I might actually have this patched through. Hang on, let me turn this on. That was feedback. And this is me turning the keyboard on. You were asking about Buchla, so I can show you something that's kind of like Buchla. This is a great example. I'll show you that. I don't have any Buchla bongos, but what I can show you is cross-modulation. The noise you're hearing is a O-coast, and it's got a triangle wave oscillator. So if you're doing the Buchla thing, you're working with what's called a complex oscillator. What a complex oscillator is you can't see it on camera. Well, you can kind of see it on camera. I'll point at it with my finger. What a complex oscillator is it's like a single oscillator, but with 2 oscillators built into it, and one of them can be set to frequency modulate the other. The Buchla thing is very heavily into doing stuff with wavefolding and frequency modulating. And what that does, you're hearing this one, and then this one is also being sent the same MIDI information. And the pitch can be independently adjusted, and I've got it coming into the linear FM input. That's what you get when you have a triangle oscillator and another one at roughly the same frequency. It starts to have this other quality because it's not the same oscillator. If I change the pitch, this stuff is fun to go into reverbs and things too, by the way, but you can hear that it's having an effect. You can turn it down. Since they're tracking the same notes, not tune perfectly, but we now have a sort of bass tone. And another thing about the booklets that is consistent with what these are doing is I've got the sustain on all the way. The O coast, make noise O coast, has this dynamics control. You can make it distort if you turn it up enough. But if you don't turn it up that much, we can easily get booklet bongos out of this. I've got the slight modulation here. And then all we got to do is make the decay shorter and probably set it to full exponential. And voila. But what gets interesting here, I'll turn the sustain back up so we can hear a sustained note, is a booklet oscillator will probably also have yet another FM input. It'll have a bunch of different ways of connecting together. We have the one being modulated by the frequency of the other. Well, we can do a thing called cross-modulation where the one modulates the other, and then the output of the result, or not actually the output of the result technically, the output of the first oscillator can modulate the one that we're using to modulate with. The X that you might be able to see here on the screen maybe is each one's triangle wave output into the FM of the other. And this is still purely on triangle waves, but we're making them far from being triangle waves. We could also throw in the wavefoldy stuff. That's another booklet style thing. That's why O Coast is called O Coast, is because it's like West Coast, but it also can do East Coast. For a proper West Coast, you wouldn't even have MIDI, and you wouldn't even have a keyboard. You'd just be having weird sequencers and stuff. So the ability to play these melodies and stuff off of a keyboard, that's the East Coast side of things. And the neat thing about working with this kind of cross-modulated oscillator, if we have the one being modulated by the other, you add lots of it and it goes kind of crazy. But if we add lots of both, getting complete total madness, because we're going to a chaotic zone where the oscillators are modulating each other, well, so intensely that it's no longer even responding in a linear way. And then if I change the pitch of one of them, we can get into these bizarre zones. And of course, if we had the overtones going, we have exactly that, but with wavefolding. And that's pretty aggressive. This is also one of the reasons why I've fallen so heavily into the doing DIY and analog stuff, because I really think that it is desirable to do some of these things in analog. Like, you've got VCV Rack, you could patch VCV Rack to do this kind of thing. I don't believe it's going to sound anywhere near as organic, although you can get kind of there. And my hope is that in future I can run the VCV Rack stuff on M1 machines. And in doing that, run the VCV Rack stuff at like 96K, 192K, whatever it takes to be able to get there, to be able to get the really feisty stuff going on. So that's our booklet tangent. There's further questions as far as the booklets or whatever, and we can get into those. That wasn't everything that I do, though, especially not the sequencing process and how I modulate. Like, one of the things you're hearing is the way that my kick is being modulated so intensely, because the Turing machine can be set to throw constant, like, you can set it so nothing's happening by writing zeros to it, or you can write all ones to it, or you can have it do a lot of random stuff, just the same as these other ones. And next to the kick one, I have a snare one. Now, in doing jams, I'm more likely to... Mike, I don't need to write a software synthesizer because the Surge synth people are using my code. And that kind of motivated me getting back into Discord. It was largely on the back of that I would be able to hang out with those folks and see what they're doing. So a software synthesizer, look into Surge. Surge is very cool. And now distracted and don't remember what I was talking about. But we can hear that I have a sampler in here. It is a Tip Top Audio 1 sampler, which is a higher quality sampler. And that's got some of the samples that you can download off of airwindows.com. Here's some. I apparently have a pitch control on this knob, and this is going to be changing the sample selection. Normally, if I'm doing jams with this kind of stuff, these knobs go either all the way here or close to it, because I'll be settling into some kind of rhythm, especially using these delays, because both of these have delays. The kick is a slower delay and the snare is a much faster delay. I changed the capacitors inside the Doppler module so that this could make a much quicker delay. Length can be quite short. This sampler is apparently using the input literally as a gate rather than simply a trigger. So it's capable of cutting it off real short. Also, same deal of if you have it on a long sustain, it'll wait until the gate is finished before firing another one. And I can use that to manipulate the density of stuff coming out of the Turing machines. Like, you'll notice it's doing this. If I shorten the length of both of these triggers, suddenly a different thing. But but the patterns are exactly the same. I haven't changed the patterns at all. And if I change the length to be something else, and that's now acting like a normal beat. Or I can just shorten the kick. Interesting side effect is that since it's an analog kick, slight differences in the trigger driving it are causing it to have different tones. We got different kick drum tones in there. Oh, no, that's not breakbeat. This is breakbeat. So that's the most recent addition. And I do have some other stuff, so let's turn that down for a sec, and no, that's the bass. I have a hi-hat in here. And that's actually not being driven by any of the Music Thing modulars. That's being driven by this thing called the Euclidean circles. And that's a sort of a, it's another Blue Lantern. It's a Blue Lantern mini shimmery. And I've talked repeatedly about how you can get a set of chips and do this particular sound effect on just raw hardware. I know which chips it uses. I don't know exactly how, for instance, this decay works, but it does. And we can tune this in various ways. And it's also got a way of sending, here, let's get some kind of interesting random modulation source here, such as this is now random modulation source. If you plug it into this mod control, and turn that up, it's always nice having a little control on these, a little potentiometer. We can make it play a little melody. Did I try EMU yet? I don't have it together enough to do that at the moment, but it is powered up and, well, it's not powered up right now, but it is there and ready to be used. I'm hoping to get a little bit more direction from the people in the drum and bass forum as to how you make it work, because when I tried it, I wasn't actually able to make a preset. I didn't know how. I've never used one of those before, so this is a bit of a learning curve. What I'm talking about today is this other stuff that is not so much learning curve for me, but stuff that I already have learned before. So the tempo for this hi-hat sound is coming off of the top entry in this Euclidean circles, and what that does is it's firing these at the same rate, but you can tell which ones it does, like you can top and bottom. You can also move where that sits, which if you were composing or producing something, that would be useful to you. You can also change the length of the pattern, so you can make these offset against each other, which is something that the booklet folks did with their sequencers fairly often. And what a Euclidean circle does, or a Euclidean rhythm does specifically, is it's going to break, you're going to tell it how many beats per 16 you're using, and then it will distribute them as evenly as it can. So it makes a bunch of sort of samba-like rhythms. It does a bunch of really well-established rhythms, because that way of breaking up beats, rather than, say, having 8 beats that are all 16th and then 8 rests in a row, they're usually distributed a little more evenly. And it's a natural way of organizing stuff like that. Now, additional things I've got, because I've been talking only about percussion. And yeah, what I've got is an E6400 Ultra. So that's not specifically an emulator. That's a particular product that was earlier, if I'm not mistaken. Before we leave percussion, I think that is useful. Now, one of the things going on there is that I've got a music thing modular driving it. It's a 16-beat length. It's producing one of these blinking results where it's firing all these sounds. In this case, I don't have a pulse lengthener, so it's triggering with every single one of these sounds. If I filled it up with beats, you get this. And that's because it's triggering a sample on a music thing modular radio music. And this is a DIY-able, I strongly endorse these, they're wonderful. This is a DIY-able Eurorack module. It's a sampler. And you can tell it to do, although maybe this one doesn't actually want me to. Able to get different results from moving this control, but it's not actually doing that for me. So here, I'll manipulate this instead. I bet that's how that's working. Is it's just, it wants a pause. At any rate, it's firing this sample off of the radio music, and if I change this, I can trigger it at different places in the sample. And let's cut the resonance while we're at it, so we can hear what it really sounds like. Now, the way I've got this arranged is that it is it's a set of breakbeat files, and they're starting at different places in the breakbeat, but it is not divided by transient. Normally what people would do is they would assume that what you want is the transient of the drum head. I disagree. Instead, what you want to do is divide up the sound, which is a continuous string of breakbeat by this drummer, and divvy it up so that you can divide it up in equal amounts. In other words, you're dividing it up by time rather than transient. And then pick out the tracks, the sounds that have that the correct start point in the sample. And each individual sample that you make goes like this. you're hitting some place on it. And the reason it's doing weird stuff is because I have this scale output enabled. That's one of the reasons why it was doing what it was doing. In fact, it seems to be re-triggering every time I reset it, which is not what I expected, but that's all good. It's fine. And the scale is taking the number that these bits are adding up to, like it's converting it into what the Turing machine calls out. And that is a variable source. That is a fluctuating value rather than an on and off. It's not a trigger output, it is a CV output. Scale of 0 is nothing. Scale turned all the way up is a larger number. And that is running into the same thing that the station control is set to. And I've got it set so that when it moves, it gets a new value. It is re-triggering. But what I have is every single new track in this collection of Breakbeat files is starting at a different place and going for like 4 bars. Just like this. Or this. It always sustains a little bit so that I can have the triggers a little more sparse and something is still going to be happening. The goal is to have all of the triggers firing to jump around in the middle of this extruded mass of breakbeat and have the drummer's feel persist across the different triggerings as long as they're being triggered. You know, if it's being triggered at exact times and all of the places you can jump to are different spots divided up by time rather than divided up by transient, you can't jump to a place where the snare was a little bit late and then all the succeeding sounds are also a little bit late. Instead, you jump to a place where you're jumping in just before the snare hits, and then it hits at the same place relative to time that it would. Basically, it does this. Where you've got it set up, where I got the samples from was basically downloading an on-band break for this. And the snare sample here, that's mine. That's one of the Airwindows samples loaded into the Tip Top Audio 1. The radio music is much cheaper than the Tip Top Audio 1, although it's supposed to not trigger as reliably, but with this kind of stuff, it's kind of basically all right. And you can see that having it firing so many triggers, it's getting repetitive. We can move it to a different station, and it's still constantly re-triggering. And it's generally just hitting the same starting point over and over, which is cool. In this you can even hear that snare hit is not right on top of the trigger. It's a little bit late, and that's the way it's playing. Now this is where that scale thing comes in, because as it's constantly retriggering this stuff, when I turn up scale, what's going to happen is that, here, let's turn this all the way over so that it's repeating. Now that's always going to be the same, right? But when I turn up scale, I'm manipulating this station control by CV, so that as it changes, it'll go to different samples rather than just always using the same one. And now I have a little procedural breakbeat. Not only that, that's just it hiccuping. That's just it freaking out for a bit. Nowhere am I actually triggering that drill and bass thing going on there. And this is why I like working with analog stuff. Because that little roll. Here, let's play with it some more. Just for fun. Let's take the same random source that we were using to manipulate the Blue Lantern, the mini shimmery, that hi-hat sound. And we'll plug it into the FM input of this filter. Now we've got that, and we're playing the same sort of drill and bass thing. But the frequency of the filter is being played by a random thing. We can pick a different random thing. Or we can get even crazier and go, here is a CV control. I'm just grabbing all these gray patch cords for this purpose. We're going to steal this and plug it into the output of SL3KT, which is a switch. Then the B goes to the previous one. Now we have a goofy thing where most of the variation is happening with the filter, but if we flip the switch, we have a completely different riff. And because that itself is CVable, and that's actually right here, we can run this into something, and it could be into a very slow thing like this Sloths, which is a very slowly varying source. It is gradually going to get around to flipping the switch, I assume. Possibly it won't. We'll see. Or we can just call that boring and instead plug into the same thing that's running the sequencer. And now we have a more complicated thing going on where we've got two random sources. It's picking between the one and the other, and it's picking through it based on what this other random source is doing, which we could also peg the kick drum. But if we wanted, we could make the kick drum be a different time signature. For instance, all of this is happening on a 16-beat sequence. So the filter is running a 16-beat sequence. We're switching between them, but both of these are 16-beat sequences. Now, if I change the kick drum to be a 12-beat sequence instead, that's going to manipulate not only what the kick is doing, which we can hear it if we turn it up. If I change that, it's also going to change the riff being played by the breakbeat. Listen to that. So the combination of the 16-beat and the 12-beat makes a much more complicated sequence. just how extreme that filtery stuff is by messing with the filter. After all, this is coming into a frequency modulation input that has a control. In fact, it's an attenuator. So yeah, procedural breakbeats off of a modular synthesizer system. And most of what you're hearing is just two devices. Although I just added the snare drum. What would we do to add this? Well, we probably can't do any dotted 16 would be 3/16. Dotted 8 is just 3/16 if I'm not mistaken. And remember, the weird ratchety stuff that's going on in there is just this analog circuitry freaking out. It's not really coming off of the triggers cleanly. And that's why the ratchet is a little weird each time. Normally, if I'm doing this kind of stuff in a jam, I've got my flashing lights going on, and I have it turned up much louder than this. But I have a microphone on that you can hear, so I can't do that right now. So yeah, this is percussion. That's a weird jam, but we haven't even begun to introduce melodic elements, and I figure I'll talk you through some of those things as well, and then we'll have had some fun and I'll go off and rest before diving into the tax and steering replacement and water heater replacement stuff that I've been living for the last couple of weeks. So I got this going, but what's this? This is mutes number 4. It's the same thing coming in through here, but it's pointing to this instead. And this is not moving. That's because this is my bass. It's being fed by this here, which is, rather than individual pulses coming out of this, the pulses are short, but these are gates, they're long. They will stay on continuously if you're triggering multiple things in a row. And that's because you can tell this to be just all pulses and no gates. And then we have a drum and bass style thing going on. This is a chord organ, which is a radio music that has been assigned to other tasks. You can have them play synthesizer frequencies. And this particular chord organ is made so that you can give it portamento, as you can hear. various different oscillator waveforms. I'll run you through them. It's a sine, a triangle, which sounds very similar. Here's our sawtooth. And then this is what I programmed into this one, which is a square wave, but you can manipulate this control to change the duty cycle of the square wave. This is also how you do like PWM, but in this case it's just on a knob. So we can make it go much thinner if we want. And then of course, we can use the filter. This is a dope for a wasp filter. It's not the kind that's bright yellow. Instead, it looks like the other dope for filters. I have a color of electrical tape on it because I'm color coding all this stuff so I know what I'm doing. Does weird warbly stuff like that, that's the wasp filter doing that. The wasp filter is based on a hex inverter chip, and the chip is actually capable of burning itself up if it's configured wrong. You're configuring this logic chip to do analog voltages, which it doesn't really want to do, so it pulls a lot of power. But one of the nice things about the wasp filter for things like basses is that it gets this really organic gnarliness when it starts warbling and doing weird stuff. And it does weird stuff when the resonance goes up too high. So you can hear resonance a little bit lower. Now, where is it getting those notes? It's getting those notes from this thing, which is called a qubit bloom. And all that is a series of random voltages. It's a little bit like a Turing machine in that it will do random voltages in a loop. In fact, it will do this loop forever unless I tell it to do mutation, which I can do like this. And it'll start coming out with different notes at some point. The voltages from that go into this thing, which is a WMD, SPO, I think? Yeah, scalar polarized offset generator. What that means, I can make the random voltages be smaller because they're going into these and telling them what note to hit on. Stand up and pull this off of the wall. It's pulling voltages that tell these where to go on these circles of chords. It's the same thing that the chord slide rule is, but it started off with these circles of chords. We're kind of like, I'm pretty sure it's using this one. One random voltage goes back and forth like this, and it is this one. In fact, I'm going to remove the clock. And now that it's doing this, and let's bring in a chord as well. This chord, this is yellow, so it's coming from this one. I'm on sines. This is a fairly low chord, but that's all good. Turn it down just a bit. This is slightly different. It still has a portamento, but it also has a chorus. So if I turn this, I can offset things in the chord, including quite a lot. Calibrating where those go. Let's wake up the breakbeat a little bit while we're at it. Calibrating this knob here is much like programming a plugin. As far as I'm getting this number in and I'm going, okay, around here we want chorusiness. So very small offsets there. And then as we keep turning it up, we get more radical. And if you turn it all the way down, you turn it off. And you get only one chord rather than the chorused chord. Because the chorused chord is using 4 more oscillators. Now I was talking about the frequencies because as you can hear, if we put this clock back in, it's playing a sequence. If I make branches smaller, it's going to play exactly a 4-note sequence. That might change with randomness, but probably not. And these knobs both manipulate the 2 values we're getting in. So it is SP1 and offset 1, SP2 and offset 2. SP means scalar. So this is the amount of offset we can get when the voltage is high. It's the fluctuation is changing. Offset just changes our base value, so the overall voltage is increasing. And this is all stuff that would relate to DCV rack as well. Let's park that there so you can see it. So if I manipulate this, we are stepping around the chord chart, and it goes like this. More voltage, higher pitch. And then this is manipulating the variation. This is where it starts. Whereas the other one, that is offset along the spoke. So if we leave this alone, we don't have any changes here. We can pick whatever offset we want, but we don't have anything happening here. And then move this one, we're changing along the spoke, so we're changing what chord sits in this particular it's a low note, so let's tell it to be a higher note. This would be our equivalent of C, this would be the major. These notes, these chords. And this also randomly fluctuates, but we get to change it at different amounts of randomness. Like we could have very small amounts of change. Right now it's set up to have no change at all. In fact, I can take the chord and plug it into here so that we're just very rapidly changing. And if I increase this one that's going around the circle, it's going around. If I do this one, it's going along. this one is giving us stuff that's all in the same key. Let's see whether I've got something I can hear. Time to get into the kind of stuff that I would be doing. Like what I'd be doing while jamming is figuring out a little out of tune up here. Chords are changing so fast here. Let's make them have fewer branches. Or, see, I just stopped because I unplugged the clock from qubit, so it's no longer changing the random voltages. Another thing that I can do, just for laughs, is, see this? This is a thing called just friends. Capable of firing pulses. Now whenever that fires a pulse, it changes the chord, but the chord no longer has anything to do with the beat anymore. Set up to this. So with it changing only this value, it's going to be playing always notes that are in the same key, no matter how much it fluctuates. But if we zero that out and change this, all the fluctuations it generates are going to be two different keys. Hear it because I'm not playing along with it very well, but when we do both of these at the same time, we have chord sequences that can go to some really weird places but aren't necessarily that far out. Also hear the analog voltages warbling things a little bit. If the voltages are between settings here. Now you might ask, why would you have stuff just sustaining like this? And the answer is you kind of wouldn't. Instead what you would do is envelope generator. And I say another envelope generator, I haven't even showed you the first one. This is the one related to this sequencer. We'll tell the bass to be quiet for a moment. So much like this thing in here, I've got this also on this little knob. So anytime I want to, I can bring that in or bring it back out again, and it can do regular things. I can set them to the same so that they match. You can hear that the hat is now doubling that. We've got a sustain control. And this is a voltage that's coming into this CV control, which is manipulating the frequency. I can increase the resonance on that a little bit. This chord is going straight out to the mix. Now, one interesting thing about that is I could also offset this by setting it with the blue light in the middle of the knob. You might not be able to see it, but it is now not doing the same sequence as the other ones. It's skipping some of those beats. So we can make a complicated beat not only by using the Euclidean sequence, but also by changing the amount of beats in it. Like I can take it right down to a very small section of the circle, and it'll just start repeating immediately. This is also something that we can do with the CMOS chips. It's the advanced stuff that I haven't gotten to. Maybe at some point I will. Wiring the hardware CMOS chips together. You'll have your sequence coming in, the clock coming in, and it'll be going to all these different outputs on the chip, but you also have a reset which can make it go back to start again. Now the interesting thing about that is that we also have a reset on the Euclidean circles. So if I turn this all the way like this, and they're not at the same position in the circle anymore. They're both set to, let's set them to 3. But if I hit reset, it will make all of the triggers start at the top again. And if I do it continuously, like patching into the trigger output of this sequencer, it's just constantly re-triggering really, really fast. Interestingly, it blinks very brightly too. Check that out. Normally I have it set up to not be as bright as this, but apparently reset means flash as brightly as you can. So that's all good. In fact, we can plug it into one of these. Interestingly, this sequencer is being driven off of a different thing. It is being driven off of Ratchet control here. So the speed of it is still going at one pitch, but something else is different. And I'll tell you why, because we haven't yet got to some of the other things. I think I have everything up and running so that they're all audible. So we've got this, right? Well, we we also have or at least we would have this if it was doing anything. This one is patched through to something, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. We just might not be patched through, that's all. Oh, I know why. I've got another chord here, which is this chord organ. It's playing the same note. But it's not going through a filter. So I have another chord organ that's also playing a chord, but it's a different inversion of the same chord. There's no filter on it, it's just raw. And it's the same deal where I can have portamento on it, and it does a chorus. So those are both chord generators. The one goes through a filter. That one doesn't go through a filter. It's just designed to do whatever I told it to. It's playing wavetables off of the synthesizer, because that's something that the chord organ is designed to do. But it's being triggered off of this sequencer, which does very brief little bursts. And this is the kind of thing where you could throw that into a reverb or something, have nice space filling stuff going on. And likewise, if you're only playing one note every 16, you can switch it to blue on the center knob and have it start cycling faster, or have it start cycling almost 16. You have it 15 against 16 and you can get some unusual patterns. And again, if you want to make them all go back to 0 again, what you do is you plug into the reset, or trigger it from somehow in the reset, and that's going to reset and make them all match again until you offset them some more again. So that's part of how all this stuff is going when I do these things. I might not want to have this too constant, because it's pretty aggressive. It's also firing a potentially DC offset value into the recorder. Some of these settings, like here's a pseudo, that is a pseudo sine wave, except for it's just an 8-bit sine wave, or 12-bit I think. Triangle, and a nice little sawtooth, and then we got a little square wave in there. The nice thing about square waves on these chord organs is that the way I'm running them, the sample rate they run at is extraordinarily high. It's like at least 300K for these guys, and the mono ones are more like a gigahertz or megahertz or something like that. It's upwards of 768K rather than 44.1. Now when I say mono ones, you might ask, what do you mean mono ones? What I mean by that is, let's do a direct input into these. I had this run into a delay, and I haven't actually used it as such, but the last time I played them, it was with them just patched straight through, and I believe this is set up to patch straight through. We got one more thing to visit. If I can persuade it to turn on, and I bet I can. Turn our resonance down a little bit so we can hear what we've got. And turn our levels up. We'll plug both of these guys in. We have another thing going on. This is my arpeggios, and those come in sometimes too. We got the one and the other. They're exactly the same except for there's a pitch offset programmed into the chord organ stuff where they're made to play different notes on a scale, but they're the same scale they're being told to play. This will follow what chord it is. Might be a little hard to tell. And the trigger that's driving these is a thing called a Ratchet controller. It's driven by this. If it's no longer firing, it's going to leave the new notes coming in like this. But then if we plug this into another thing again, that's generating triggers off of this, which is the Ratchet controller, that can make the triggers come fast and furious. And it's a factor of this clock divider, which is making sort of like a steady beat. And then we're subdividing it with this. It takes a little while for it to catch up, but then it'll start subdividing. It'll be doing different subdivisions of that beat coming along. Here, let's pick a slower beat. And I got a couple of different tricks going on with this. One of them is that the tempo coming out of this clock out, the subdivider, you can run a CD into that as well too, is not necessarily the same as the 16th note stuff. I can do weirder subdivisions like sevens and so on. It's set to prime number. Or actually that is set to numbers of subdivisions. I could tell it to re-trigger on prime numbers, but I can also subdivide by different numbers. So right now we're subdividing by 1. This is exactly the same sequence of triggers. I change that subdivision, double it up, triple. Now that doesn't have anything to do with the underlying 16th notes, but the triggers are able to do it. And then 4. Back to the groove again, until we go to 5, which is weird again. And the interesting thing about that is that that trigger is not only driving this, which is the envelope control, and the envelope control is doing not only the loudness of those notes, but also there's a filter attachment I can do. That's not it. CV3 here is set to the pitch of the filters that each of these are going through. If that doesn't sound sufficiently 303E enough, that's because the way that the envelope is falling off isn't 303. We can turn it all the way over to exponential. And get more into that acidy zone where these filters, which are the A103 VCF6, they're the 303 style filter, can be told to do that kind of thing. But the same sequence that is causing this to happen is also running this Euclidean circles, which is another sequencer, and now this is not associated with that. So let's see now. I'm trying to figure out how to make this fire. Let's take one, and I'll unplug this trigger input, or rather than that, I've got this set up on purpose so that I can run extra stuff into, say, the hat. Now I've got this hi-hat. Also triggering with these guys. And it'll track whatever that does. But interestingly, I can have it not trigger on every note, because the Euclidean circles will let me tell it to do any combination of notes. Or if I have it at a very slow rhythm, we can also fire that hi-hat off of the 16th note and also the weirder one. So we've now got a weird side effect. Now we've got a bizarre little hi-hat where part of it is the 16th notes going along, and part of it is the bizarre additional thing happening with this other sequence that's driving these 303 guys. We'll take the steady bit down to 4 and start ramping up the ratcheting. So that's a way of getting some really weird stuff going on. And that's because the kick drum, oh yeah, did I mention the kick drum? I've also got that going on in the kick drum where I can mix that too. I'm running an additional sequence into that. Because it's mixing trigger inputs to fire the kick drum. When I have the sustaining one, I can't fire anymore, but if I cut the length of the kick drum right down, it's going to get real busy. Generally, it's going to be better to fire rapid stuff like that in some kind of percussion rather than the kick. It'll get messy. But we can do silly things like this. We can go let's make these go even faster by driving this ratchet controller off of twice as fast of an input. Now what notes are we playing? The same ratchet is driving this thing called the clef diaz, and that is doing the pitch of these notes. The key is being changed by the overall key change of the melody, but the note, rather than being chord along the spoke, is just a sequence of a scale going up and down. So we can make it go up and down. This too has a reset. Since it has a reset, it'll do this sort of consistent thing. And it's following the chords again. If you take the reset out, it's going to just keep going up and down. And if you make the reset re-trigger less often, we have a consistent thing going on. And of course, if this sounds too cheerful, we can also offset the kind of chord we're playing. Also, one side note is that when we have these bass notes playing so continuously, I've had the bass notes on constant this entire time because it's kind of like more drum and bassy, I guess. But we don't have to. We can have the bass notes be kind of jamming. And that'll play a rhythm in the bass notes, because now we've got this turning on and off rather than just being continually on. And that is also increasing the value that goes to mutation. So in theory, if it's playing very busily, it will change the chords a little more often, although I'm not sure if it's quite doing it. So we're taking out some of the weirdness having to do with the kick drum. And as you can hear, we've got a bass line playing, and we've got these guys playing their little 303 thing. Licking at this rate. Turn the sustain down. And we can have them be more chirpy like this. This is one of the things about real 303s and Zox boxes and stuff, is that you can get very crisp little attacks on it. The incredibly fast attack here is going into the filters and this VCA, and it's really quite loud, but it's so quick that you barely hear it, although it will ping reverbs pretty good. Now there's an additional side effect to pay attention to. If we turn our sustain all the way up, we have a nice little crisp sequence of notes getting played off of this guy. I have an additional thing wired into this. Let's turn this one that has to do with the envelope. Right, we'll turn the envelope off. Having turned the envelope off, it's now just a fixed frequency, right? There's an additional CV input to this, and I'm not even running it as CV1. I'm just doing the ones where there's attenuators on them. This mimetic digitalis, this sequencer, is doing separate random things for each of these guys, and it's being triggered off of the same trigger that the overall timing of them is. I can tell the input to be only one input on this, so it's making a 4-note sequence. This too has a reset, so if I plug into its reset, which I believe is, let's see, O. O means origin. It's essentially the same thing as the reset. If I was to plug this into a 16th note, for instance, it's just constantly being reset. If I was to plug it into this, it's resetting so fast that it's almost not going through its sequence at all. If I was to plug this into, say, this one over here, which is being a prime numbered thing, now we have a reset that's doing an odd time signature. And the interesting thing about this is, hear our little jam here? If we change this ratchet control, this is all tied together. It's doing the same thing over and over again, but it's no longer linked to the pulse. Until it comes around to being the right frequency, where it's no longer an odd time subdivision of things. And we are re-triggering it. If we re-trigger it at a funny odd time there, or indeed, we could get really daring. I've got a re-trigger for this and a re-trigger for this. If I re-trigger them both the same, we can get various little weird jams going on. And it's all through patching stuff together in interesting ways. And a lot of this you could be doing in VCD Rack if you were really down with that. I like doing it in analog stuff, but what we're hearing now is this is plugged to reset, this is plugged to origin. So we're re-triggering all of this stuff on this rhythm, which is a time signature. It's an odd time. Also bear in mind that these two guys, what I've got as blue and purple color coded, these also have the same portamento, and they also have the same thing that the bass has, which is If you have it set on the square wave, you can modulate the pulse width with this knob. And you can also go to a sort of sine wavy thing, triangle, or sawtooth. And because we're doing the mimetic digitalis for these pitch offsets, the filter offsets, we can load shred, we can randomize them some more. Sort of hit that until it does something useful. Or you can load 0. That just turned the filters off. Or 0 shred gets you lower values. And of course we can bring up CV3 for envelope stuff, although right now the envelope is just square wave. So what we'd be doing is doing this. The envelope is affecting only the volume, but we can increase the filter part of the envelope like this. And that's kind of how this stuff works, really. That's a weird breakbeat. In fact, I think it just stopped. That's just the randomness making the Turing machine go to no notes all of a sudden. So it stopped because the Turing machine ran out of notes for a second. So, I hope that was a little bit of fun. It was what I needed today. I haven't gotten back into the soldering stuff together all that fast, but there's other things to do. And kind of the gist of that is that part of doing the DIY or any of these kinds of things is thinking of new things to do. When you have too many things happening, it does get a little overwhelming. So I'm just gonna put some of these back. I would have thought that I had more going on in the reverb than this, but no matter. And we'll hit stop. So we'll get back to the making circuitry and so on at some point in future. But for now, I think that's what I had going on today. I'm going to catch a little bit of rest. I promise to do more of those VSTs, because that seems like a good thing to do, is put out more of the VSTs for the M1 processor. A fair number of people are downloading them, but I hear nothing about them. I guess for most people they're working fine, and it's neither to be complained about or to need support with, so that's probably a good sign. Anywho. I will say, talk to you folks later. Bye-bye.